This week, Reem Alsalem has got a reply from the Australian High Commission. She's written to the Special Procedures Branch, Office of the High Commission for Human Rights in Geneva, with concerns about the way Maura deeming has been treated and how women generally are treated in Australia who have gender critical beliefs. She's asked for them to reply to a number of points, most of which they've completely ignored. And their reply is completely inadequate. They've quoted some of the points and completely ignored the fact that women with gender critical beliefs are being targeted with abuse and violence in Australia. They've mentioned a couple of things, including, do you remember we talked about there was an investigation in Canberra after the Brittany Higgins affair into equity, gender equity and workplace in Canberra. And they made a report. And the end of the report, I wrote about it in The Spectator, I'll put it up there as well. The end of the report essentially was to give all the politicians more staff, most of whom are men. and they're talking here about human resources, giving more human resources. That's a way of combating violence against women, is by giving fat cats more people. And the other one was the e-safety commissioner. They've mentioned that they've got the e-safety commissioner here protecting women. And here we go, encouraging participants to spread online safety messages.
That was absolutely hilarious. Like they talk about the these domestic violence programs at that, the government pours, rightly, I would say, pours millions of dollars into. But it doesn't answer the question, which is that there is a political violence against these women.
Yeah.
And it's because of their political beliefs that we're being targeted.
And the e-safety commissioner is actually inflaming that violence, because the people that they're calling hateful and chucking off the platforms, myself being one of them, are targeted because of our belief in sex. The partnership focuses the impact of gender-based online harassment and abuse on victim survivors, like me, in their private lives, as well as the cost to society and democracy of online violence directed towards women in their public lives as journalists, politicians, and activists. What have they done for you, Kit Kowalski, as an activist?
Well, they did. Well, we are. I think our episode of the Dollhouse has been the subject of a registered complaint with eSafety. Technically, I don't think eSafety did take any action on our episode. I think YouTube just decided to geo-block it on their own recognizance. Yeah.
So effectively, we were censored in Australia.
We were censored in Australia. Yeah.
And that was because they did become involved. But because they don't have any legislative teeth to come after us.
And I think that, what happens is that the platform gets slapped with a warning or a takedown notice or a block notice. And then the lawyers get involved, and the lawyers just say, well, next time this happens, just anytime there's a complaint for this individual, take it down. Just err on the side of caution. Don't expose yourself to the risk of a lawsuit. Don't expose yourself to any further cost of having to get lawyers to read these bloody notices, right? Because every time you get a notice, you have to get a lawyer who costs you a huge amount of money to read the notice, to decide what it means, to decide what your response should be, to make policy, to advise the staff. It's costly. It's easier just to take the content down.
Especially when you make money. Like, we don't make any money from YouTube, so we can put the middle finger up and do what we like. I saw Michael Knowles this week. He had an interview with a trans widow woman that was only on Twitter because he didn't want to risk his platform. He was advised by his legal team that he could lose his channel for putting it up. Now, what that does, it's not so bad now on Twitter, but before, when we weren't able to defend ourselves, the trans activists would target us with abuse and wait for us to reply and tell them to stick up their ass or call them men or whatever, and then they would get us banned. So now we don't have that as much. But if the eSafety Commissioner had her way, that's exactly what we have. And it actually inflames violence against women. It encourages things like where Leah, who we talked about last week, who's just recently had a baby, is standing in the street, putting up her signs outside Parliament House, outside QUT on Speaker's Corner here in Brisbane, and gets accosted and abused by trans activists. And he just thinks that's his right to just go up to a pregnant woman in the street and abuse her because he decides he's wearing a dress. For all intents and purposes, by the Queensland government, he's a woman, which he's not. So that's male pattern violence being shielded in gender identity ideology. And they're doing that to us. And that's what Reem Alsalem is saying. These are the concerns we have. They're basically saying, shove it up your ass, the Australian government. They don't give two hoots about us.
And they're almost deliberately misinterpreting her questions.
Yes.
And I think that they're doing the classically bureaucratic sort of, maneuvering. So, she says violence against women, and they say, oh, we've got a little Lego brick that fits into that slot.
Yeah.
And, it's the respect program, or, and then we can say, well, we put all sorts of money into these programs. Aren't we doing a good job? We've got a tick in the box.
Yeah.
Whether or not that addresses the question, whether or not those programs actually address the issue that is being talked about, or whether or not those programs are even targeted at women, or are they targeted at gender violence or family violence, or, like, do they include men when they talk about women?
Yeah.
Are they suitable for women? That isn't, obviously gone into in the scope of the letter, but it enables them to really sort of fob her off.
Yeah.
I think this is actually a very good sign that she's investigating what's happening to Moira. And she's looking into it. She's writing letters. She's, gathering evidence. And I think that we have a very strong and courageous ally in our corner, who has her eye on the Australian situation.
Yeah, good on her. I'm really happy with her, and
yeah,
it's good that she's sticking up for Australian women. I'm sorry. I feel sorry that Australia has attracted the attention of an international human rights women's advocate, because Australian women's rights are being eroded with gender identity. There's no question. So we're going to try and keep pointing that out.
But it is also a really timely reminder about Moira's case, and just the personal toll that this must be taking on her and on all the women who have a personal case that they have had to put forward in the courts, or that they've had to answer in the courts. There is a huge personal cost to this activism for some women.
Talk about victim survivors. Moira is a victim survivor. I am. When I came out with my story, trans activists, I've never had anyone in my whole life say horrible things about the situation that I lived through. Now I've got trans activists who say, you're just coming out with this story because you want to abuse trans people. You're like a sexual racist. Being abused has made you like a racist against trans people. These are horrible things to say to survivors, and I'm tough enough to listen to it and hear it, but they don't care. They don't care. There's so many. It's not as if I'm this unique little person. Sexual assault is a massive problem. And by allowing these gross men to say the things they do to us about us and about our bodies, and to pretend that they're just like us by wearing the clothes and they're subject to the same kind of oppression, is such a terrible insult to Australian women.
What's that phrase that you use? They're giving women's rights to women's clothes. I think it's very clever, and
putting it on their clothes.
Yeah, they're taking the rights away from the body, and they're putting it into the clothes. Next week, we're going to have a talk about men wearing women's clothes. We're going to try and do a bit of a deep dive into that topic, and sort of try to tease out some of the issues as to why women feel so upset about it. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons, is that they're taking the women's rights away from the body and they're giving it to the clothes.
And enforcing stereotypes.
Yeah.
rather than reducing them.